Hello, this is Ken Ferry with this week's Boots in the Field. Kind of everybody sliding into a little bit of a rain delay or slowing down. A lot of guys switching out of beans and going to go to corn until this passes through. Our local forecast is telling us from 2 to 3 inches potential before this is over, so that means here at Hayworth we ought to get at least a quarter, maybe even a half inch out of this one. And we would welcome that. The soil test crews are saying it's hard to get the probe in, so they'd like to have some rain to make that process move easier, as well as maybe soften up some of this tillage. But starting out with a crop report, getting again more reports in from our guys up there in east central Iowa in what we thought was a sweet spot all year, and it continues to stay strong. They're cutting their beans in the between the 70s and the 90 bushel range. Corn in that 250 to 270 range, and that's still in their early maturing hybrid, so they're expecting even bigger things in their full seasons. They did take one field out with potential Dicamba volatility up there. Only showed somewhere between 1 and 2 bushel difference in yield, basically insignificant to some extent. Guys up in Wilmington, Jeff up there, Richie Grain, he thinks they're about 50% done with beans. Beans have been running from the low 50s to the low 70s. Probably looking at a lot of 60 bushel averages there. Slow start on the corn, he said up there. Right now, hasn't heard much, but somewhere in that 180 to 220 range on the corn yields themselves. Slide on over there to Livingston County. Jeff said there at Sonneman, they think they're about 80% done with beans. We're at Wing, they're about 50%. Over there, it's kind of that story of the 116, Highway 116 route that we talked about this summer. North of the 116, they got too much water early and not enough water late, and that's showing up in the yields. North of 116, you're seeing more in the low 40s on beans to the mid 50s. If we get south of 116, you're in the mid 50s to mid 60s. And it does look like all the way across the Indiana border, that area of heavier rainfall, we're seeing more problem with water damage probably than we are in the drier areas of being burnt up. Some of those low-lying ponds and stuff are what's dragging the farm averages down. Corn north of 116, again in the 150, 180 range. Get south of it in the 200 to 240 range. They also took out 2 Dicamba volatility drift plots up there. I guess you'd call them plots or fields, and recorded no loss this week as well, as far as no difference in yield. Over in the Grand Ridge area, Bubba up there at Helena said that he thinks they're about 50% done with beans. Yields have been swinging wide from the low 50s to the high 70s on the soybean side. They're really just getting started on the corn. Corn in the 220 250 range, 16 to 20% corn. Guys are pretty happy with the corn. Mixed emotions on the beans. Said they did have some dicamba fields that came out up there. One was contamination, where it was in the boom, and that one was a negative 0.8 of a bushel. They had one also that had drift, and 1.8 bushel difference with the drifted on it itself, and a couple volatility ones where there was no difference. So basically no difference coming out of their camp too from some of the dicamba up there. Over in the Donovan area, Donovan Co-op, Fred up there thinks they're about 50% done with beans. Kind of in that same 116 route up there from the low 50s to the mid 60s on the soybeans itself. Corn just getting started, but hearing some corn yields, field averages that are going to be 200 plus for them. He did say that where they replanted beans, tore them up and replanted them, they're definitely faring better than where the guys just stuck beans in and thinking to stand up or spotted it in. So the replants are holding their own. He thinks corn looks like it's going to be the same way too. Move over to Tazewell County. Mark thinks they're about 50% done with beans. Some growers as high as 90%. Beans are still staying strong in the upper 70s for a lot of fields. On the corn side, again, but got a ways to go there yet, but in that wide range of 220 to 270, hearing a lot of 240 with the good stands, and the corn that was planted that produced the poor stands, that is falling back between 2 and 220, and that I guess would be expected itself. Comments coming out of there, they think their April beans are 5 to 10 bushel better than the May beans. And so far, they've taken out the Dicamba volatility fields that they've worked on. Said they haven't seen a difference in yield there either, on the ones that they've had out. Move on down to New Berlin, Winchester area. The guys down there think they're about 85% done with beans. Their early beans were pretty much in that 80 to 90 bushel range, at least 80 plus. In their earlier maturing beans, and they moved into their later planted, fuller season beans, and the yields have backed up a little bit, in the upper 60s to the lower 70s for that. Looking at yield-wise on corn, they're just really getting started back on corn. They've shifted over. In the New Berlin area, they took out a variety plot, went from 230 to 270, field averages 210 to 230. Down in the Winchester area, field average is 190 to as high as 250, so that's exciting for that light soil there. Guys at Blue Mound think they're 80% done with beans. Saw a lot of 75 to 80 bushel beans in their April beans. Their May beans are running about 10 bushel under that. Only about 40% done with corn, but think it could be their third biggest crop yet on corn. A lot of 230, 240 at 15, 16%. Here locally, I would say we're 50% done on beans as well, running from the low 60s to the mid 70s for most of it. Corn yields are running from 180 to 230. Does make a little bit of difference as far as where you are in the rain pocket or not. We did take out a couple Dicamba issued fields this week. One that dealt with drift, where it came across the road, and actually two that dealt with drift. One had no difference in yield. One was a bushel and a half higher to the drifted beans. We had one where the sprayer contamination went through and dinged the beans, and that one came out as a 0 as well. And a couple volatility fields that we had good anchors for. And that's a challenge, is to get a good anchor to a field to know what you're going to anchor to. And they look like a 0 as well. One of the things I do note on the Dicamba drift, a couple of fields this week actually, where the drift hit the field, the beans are greener. And they're a little slower to dry down. Be a little bit careful there if you're just using a yield monitor, because in one of the fields, the yield monitor was indicating the drifted area was underperforming, and then when we put it on a truck and took it to the scale, it was actually overperforming. And that's not uncommon with when it comes to combining soybeans. If they get a little tougher, a little hard to work with, a situation where they can actually show up as negative on the yield monitor compared to what the actual scale card is. So keep that in mind, especially if you're taking out fungicide plots and things like that would change the ability to get that bean through the combine itself. So kind of keep that in mind. Had a big week on plots, a lot of plots coming out this week. So we're off and running in pretty good shape there. We took some Allevo plots out and ranged anywhere from a -1 bushel to a +8. So it'll be interesting as we dig through those. Fungicides coming out, fungicide trials on soybeans, kind of banging around in that 0 to 2 bushel range. So far, the corn fungicides look like they're a washout. We got a lot more to come out, so that may change, but nothing big and exciting from the corn fungicide at this point. Our seed pods and our fixed flex plots, got one of those that came out. The 24,000 population hung in there at about 200 bushel, where the 36,000 at 250. So that's some pretty good corn that came out of the Waseca area itself. Guys took out some roller plots where we rolled the beans, and looks like, again, rolling the beans might have bumped us about 2 bushel in yield. That may be also why these Dicamba beans aren't responding negatively as well. The beans took that stress and moved it forward. We also took out some nitrogen and sulfur plots, but they'll take a lot more digging into to know what we're actually seeing there itself. Have continued to see signs of rootworm that concern me. I was taking out one of the tile study plots, so soybean field, and we had rootworm beetle on that combine windshield all day, moving back and forth. You guys want to keep an eye on that. That's something that we haven't seen for a few years, and be thinking about what you're going to do in those fields for next year, but we're still seeing them itself. You guys want to do the best you can on managing this harvest loss. I realize when you're cutting 8 to 10% beans with green stems and leaves, it is a challenge, but try to keep an eye on that both at the header loss and coming out the back end of that machine. talking with a number of guys and trying to slow down the harvest loss itself, it does seem the speed makes a difference. Slowing those combines down is helping to get us back into a more acceptable loss itself. So I guess the moral of the story is take a chill pill. We'll get there. Just don't run over these beans or push it too hard in that process. Standability seems to be good everywhere, so that's great. Even the wind damaged corn that got twisted around this summer, guys are saying that while it's maybe hard to stay on the row sometimes, that it is standing pretty decent as far as getting it in the head without losing it out there in the field. Consider this a gift from the grain gods out there, but don't take it for granted. Keep an eye on this so we got a lot of corn to harvest in this state yet, so let's not get caught by assuming all of it's going to stand. So keep doing your pre-harvest checks in these fields and watching them. Make sure they don't come apart on you. But so far, just about everybody's talking about the standability has been good for them itself. So the crews are out hard at the fall testing. Now that we have a rain delay, it would be a good time to sit back and look at your fall testing needs and get those orders in if you don't have them in, or get us caught up on what you have harvested out there. Again, the guys are cleaning up behind these combines, so don't forget, as you knock them down, call them in there, and we'll clean them up for you to keep this whole thing moving so you can get your fertilizer applied here before the weather changes itself. So with that, keep her safe, keep her moving.